Welcome to this educational session on integrated pest management, an introduction to sustainable pest management brought to you by the Safe Quality Food Institute, or SQFI, and presented by Tamara Richardson, the founder and president of Cornucopia Crop Consulting. SQFI is a division of FMI, the Food Industry Association. As the Food Industry Association, FMI works with and on behalf of the entire industry to advance a safer, healthier, and more efficient consumer food supply chain through advocacy, collaboration, and education. The SQF program for food safety certification is GFSI benchmarked and internationally recognized with over 14,000 certifications issued globally. From farm to fork, SQF food safety codes are used by the industry for the assurance of food safety. Our SQF certification body partners deliver food safety and quality audits on farm, in factory, and across the distribution chain for food, dietary supplements, packaging, and as well as pet food and animal feed. Farming operations choose SQF certification because it is affordable, flexible, and our certification body partners have a broad network of available qualified auditors, making it simpler to schedule audits and achieve certification. Visit sqfi.com to access our free resources and available training options to get you started on your way with SQF. But first, here is Tamara Richardson from Cornucopia Crop Consulting presenting today's session to help you prepare for implementing sustainable pest management for pollinator protection.
Hi there, my name is Tamara Richardson, and I'm here today to talk to you about integrated pest management. I work and live in the southern Okanagan Valley, specifically the Similkameen Valley in British Columbia. And a lot of my work involves helping farms develop and implement integrated pest management plans tailored to their specific operations. But the bulk of my work occurs with tree fruit growers and grape growers. So today we're going to be talking about the benefits of sustainability certification, the different components of an integrated pest management plan, the importance of pollinators, and different strategies that can be used to protect pollinators. So what is integrated pest management? Integrated pest management is an approach to pest management that combines physical, cultural, biological, and chemical tools in such a way that it minimizes environmental, human health, and economic risks. It is increasingly becoming important to implement IPM plans on farms. Some of the reasons for this include market demand for pollinator-friendly and IPM-compliant practices, consumer awareness, and consumer awareness about the environmental impacts of agricultural practices. This involves the use of heavy chemical pesticides. Several food retailers, including Walmart, Whole Foods, Kroger, and others, are increasingly requiring their suppliers to adhere to IPM standards as a part of their own corporate sustainability commitments. Many consumers are also showing a willingness to pay a premium for products produced using sustainable practices. So sustainability standards are guidelines that outline the economic, environmental, and social conditions that must be met for a product or service to be considered sustainable. There are many different types of these, and they are often specific to particular industries or sectors. Examples include the Rainforest Alliance, Fair Trade, Organic Certification, the IPM Institute Sustainable Food Group Standard, and other retailer-specific standards. The goal of these is ultimately to promote sustainable practices to reduce the environmental impact and ensure economic viability of farms and operations. Compliance with sustainability standards is typically validated through a third-party audit and the following certification processes. Many of you are familiar with this process through your SQF certification. Benefits of sustainability certification are many, and just a few of these are market access. Certification can act as a passport to new markets, especially those where buyers are demanding proof of sustainable practices. Many consumers, as I mentioned earlier, are willing to pay a premium for sustainably produced goods. This can lead to higher profitability for you. Operational improvements are another benefit. So certification does involve this audit of your operations, which can help to identify areas where you can use your resources more efficiently. The adoption of sustainable practices can help with some risk management and reducing potential future costs related to environmental, social, or governance risks and issues. Sustainability certification also demonstrates your commitment to responsible practices, which can enhance your reputation and the trust relationship with your consumers. As sustainability becomes more important for investors, certified farms and operations can actually become more attractive to outside investment as well. So more long-term impacts of the SQF plus sustainability addendum, with the implementation of these programs, you may adopt practices such as a more diversified cropping system. You may start to use cover crops and soil conservation methods. These can help increase your farm's capacity to withstand extreme weather events. Maintaining healthy soil and diverse ecosystems, which can be a byproduct of implementing integrated pest management, can help your farm better recover from shocks like droughts or floods or heat domes. Practices like integrated pest management can help your farm's ability to withstand pests and diseases. This is done by encouraging biodiversity and minimizing the use of pesticides, which can help facilitate beneficial insect populations, for example, which will help keep pest populations in check and may help to reduce the likelihood of certain pest outbreaks. And then just overall, sustainability can lead to improved efficiency and cost savings on your farm, contributing to your financial as well as ecological resilience. So things like efficient water use, on-site composting, use of renewable energy, this can help reduce your reliance on external inputs. And as I mentioned earlier, certification can open up new markets for you and potentially enable price premiums, which leads to your financial stability. So we're going to turn to IPM now, and I'm going to provide you just a very brief history of integrated pest management, and this is by no means exhaustive. So some of the earliest recorded practices or recorded integrated pest management practices include for example, in ancient Egypt, where Nile catfish were used in irrigation channels to control snails that carried the schistosoma parasite. And then I'm going to jump way ahead now to the era where several synthetic heavy pesticides were developed and widely used for pest control. These were, very successful, but most of these being broad spectrum. We had the development of resistant pest populations and other negative impacts. One, example with DDT was its interference with the egg production of raptors and raptor population declines. That's one small example. The publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in 1962 really, the general public became really more aware of the impacts of some of these chemical pesticides on the environment. I say here from the 1950s to the 1960s, but in fact, probably earlier, researchers began to develop and promote integrated pest management and as a Much research began, and these researchers began to promote and develop these programs. An early one that's not mentioned here, I believe it's from the 1930s, was the use of I believe it was a parasitic wasp to control cottony cushion scale in citrus. We move a little bit forward to the 1970s when government support for integrated pest management through various programs and research initiatives began. One in my neck of the woods, with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, work in the research station at Agassiz. They worked on developing a parasitic wasp, commercial production of a parasitic wasp for use on whitefly in greenhouses. And then ultimately to the present with more global adoption of integrated pest management as a sustainable and environmental friendly approach to pest management, with organizations like the UN and the FAO promoting IPM as an important part of sustainable agriculture. So what are the components of an IPM plan? We're going to get into these in a little bit more detail, and others may group these differently or name them differently, but really all of these things would be covered in the components of an integrated pest management. So we've got identification, we've got monitoring and record keeping, we've got economic injury levels, we've got economic thresholds, also known as action thresholds, and economic damage models, control strategies, taking action, and then ultimately evaluating what you've done. Pest identification is really important in integrated pest management. We need to have an accurate diagnosis. We need to know what our pest actually is, and we need to know about their life cycles. Knowing what you have is important for selecting the appropriate pesticide, really making sure that what you are seeing is on the label of the input that you want to use. Understanding the biology and behavior and ecology of the pest insects really helps you to make important decisions on the appropriate timing for control. We see this picture in the middle of these 6 different larvae. They're the same species, and as you can well imagine, if controls are applied at an earlier stage when the larva is young, they are easier to kill. Also, really knowing your beneficial organisms and being able to identify those helps you protect those beneficial organisms. I'm using an example here of a syrphid larva, which really looks a lot like the pest larva that you see in the center of the image there. These guys are really important aphid predators. So if you mistake these for a pest and you go and spray them, you're really, really harming something that's very beneficial and is a really great predator, particularly of aphids in this case. And so really want to minimize non-target impacts, and this identification really, just want to drive this message home, ensures that you're applying controls only to target pests, and you can potentially significantly reduce harm to non-target organisms. Got a picture here of a ladybug larva. I've had new growers that I've worked with who've been concerned when they see these, and then very happy when they find out what they are, and recognizing that an abundant population of these likely means you may not have to put a spray on for something like aphids. And so anytime you don't have to spray, you're saving money. So the identification really ties into the economic benefits of an IPM plan as well, helping you to avoid unnecessary or ineffective control measures. Monitoring is a critical part of integrated pest management, making sure that you're out there before you anticipate pests a bit, as they can be seasonal fluctuations, and monitoring regularly. These 2 components are really critical for detecting and managing your pest infestation. Knowing the biology of your plants too. So for example, I've got here example for blueberries. Mummyberry fungicides are often applied when you've got about 2 to 5 centimeters of growth. So you really want to be out there monitoring regularly so you can target that fungicide intervention at an appropriate time. Um, Sticky traps and pheromone traps are also widely used for monitoring. Got an example here of yellow sticky traps used for whitefly, and a sticky trap that had been from a pheromone baited trap for diamondback moth and broccoli fields. So another item here are the use of degree day models when available for predicting pest populations. Many of your local extension services will have some of these available for use, either through universities or through government organizations. It's worthwhile looking into this if you don't already have that information. Using these tools can help you figure out when to start monitoring. I use them very regularly in my area. They're very helpful tools. Record keeping is a very critical component of integrated pest management. Regularly collecting information on your pests, the abundance of your pests, and the distribution of them, and the damage observed is important. Also, monitoring any beneficial insects that you're seeing as well. These data can help you to identify trends and to help you make timely decisions about control measures. You want to document your controls. If you do have SQF certification or other certification, these the documentation of particularly your chemical inputs is required. Also maintaining records of any biological control, physical control, cultural controls used in addition to those chemical control records. Including details like what you're using, where you're using it, when you used it, and any relevant environmental conditions. This all helps you make informed decision and provides a record that you can go back to over the years and compare things from year to year. Economic thresholds and economic injury levels, also known as action thresholds and economic damage models. These are decision-making tools for integrated pest management as well. So economic thresholds are pest population levels at which control measures should be implemented to prevent economic damage. These unfortunately are not available for all pests. Economic injury levels or economic damage models, these are tools that can be used to estimate potential financial losses that are associated with different levels of pest infestations and the cost of control measures. These help to determine action thresholds or economic thresholds. So in these sorts of models, the crop value, pest damage potential, cost of controls, and environmental conditions are considered. And ultimately, we want to have adaptive management. These action thresholds or economic thresholds and economic injury levels may change over time. Things that may influence the change of these are changes in pest populations. Maybe something was a pest, but no longer is. Crop values also change over time, and new control methods may become available, or there may be changes in best practices. So these are all considerations here. And some people develop their own economic injury levels. Some are available, but ultimately, you need to input your costs into these sorts of models, and they are not always available, which is unfortunate. They are very time consuming and require a lot of data to build these models. There are multiple control strategies. I've sort of grouped these into 4 main strategies here. These are, and some of them kind of overlap a bit too. These are cultural control, biological control, mechanical control, and chemical control. So cultural control are proactive, preventative strategies for pest and disease management. These can include cultural controls can include such things as crop rotation, which is changing the type of crop grown in a specific field or area to disrupt pest life cycles and reduce buildup. I've got an example of white rot infected garlic here. Growers that I work with have about a 3 or 4 year rotation, typically with cover crops in between. We've got very low incidence. That's partially due to climate too, but yeah, crop rotation is a really critical component of ground crop integrated pest management. Sanitation, this involves removing any crop debris, such as weeds, infected plant material, to eliminate disease inoculum, pest habitat, food sources, the use of planting resistant planting resistant cultivars. This can include selecting crop varieties that are less susceptible to pests or diseases and ultimately reduce the need for control measures. Proper irrigation and fertilization are also important aspects. It's basically managing stress. Also, many other benefits to be had by having appropriate irrigation and fertilization programs. For example, in tree fruit, overly vigorous trees with excessive luxuriant growth can attract aphids. So yeah, just considering these items, reducing stress essentially, and maintaining appropriate vigor are critical. Timing of planting and harvesting. Adjusting your planting and harvesting dates can help you disrupt pest life cycles. If you can avoid periods of having a crop in periods of high pest pressure, this can be helpful. So physical and mechanical control, these tend to be direct hands-on approaches or use of equipment to help reduce pest and disease. This can range from the hand removal of insect pests, potentially. I know small vineyards where I live, they'll go out during bud break and they'll hand remove cutworm at night with headlamps. Because they emerge from the soil or bark crevices at that time and feed on those buds. The use of mass trapping, the use of netting to reduce bird damage, pruning for airflow, for disease management. These are all examples of physical and mechanical controls. Biological control. So biological control can be thought of as modifying the environment to enhance local pest populations or release of commercially produced predators, parasitoids. This is also can include pathogens. I want to include here, but it also, I'm not entirely sure where it fits, but mating disruption is available for certain pests too, which involves the release of sex pheromones into a crop area via puffers or via various twist ties or wicks. And what happens is any males in that area become confused and struggle to find mates because the pheromone plumes are everywhere. So other examples of biological controls include predators. So this is direct feeding on a target pest. So the example of the syrphid fly larva feeding on aphids. There's some commercially available species, including lacewings, various mites, ladybugs. Predators and parasitoids. These are when an insect lays an egg or live larva or nymph on or directly inside of the target pest. The visual here is parasitic wasps on a hornworm. There are some commercially available parasitoids. The whitefly parasitoid I mentioned earlier, Incarcia formosa, is an example. Pathogens can also be used. An example of this is Virusoft or Sidex for codling moth, very species-specific viruses, which is a beneficial thing because they can be quite targeted with limited to no non-target effects. Insecticides and fungicides made from bacteria and fungi are available. Dipel, Bacillus thuringiensis. Dipel contains Bacillus thuringiensis, as does Bioprotect. So they can be very specific to moth larvae. Multiple options, something to talk to your chemical suppliers about if you're interested. And then ultimately, chemical control. I really do want to note that there are certain things and certain conditions where, preventative use of chemicals is required. Particularly, for example, in a high relative humidity area where mildew is an issue there are models, there are disease models, and as much as you can use these as you can, as many of these as you can use, this is great. Really, chemical control, we want to limit this. This is used as a last resort, or when your economic models show you that you will potentially have a major problem. Use these in concert with other types of control, really ensuring that you're using the right pesticide, that it's registered, and it's an effective treatment against your target pest and has the lowest environmental impact. Applying your pesticides at the right time is really important too. We talked about this earlier. We want to apply these when pests and diseases are most vulnerable. We also want to minimize the non-target impacts. So you got to know your pest and beneficial insects life cycles, using the right equipment, using the correct rate with the appropriate equipment, making sure you have effective coverage, right label rate, minimizing drift, minimizing runoff. Really important is to rotate between pesticide classes. If you know that there is something that you're using is considered risky, swap that out. There's different options there, talking to your chemical suppliers about helping you to develop, or your consultants about helping to develop a good rotation plan, use of biofungicides and biopesticides when possible. But it's important to note that not all of these are without their impacts as well. By that, I mean the biofungicides and biopesticides. So, and really critical is evaluation of your program, assessing your successes, assessing your failures, and adjusting your strategies based on this, and assessing your methods used. Those monitoring records and those control records that you kept really are the tools that you use to assess your program. Reviewing any economic thresholds and action levels, or those economic injury levels that we talked about. Did your control tactics work? Were the thresholds too low? Did you have more damage than you anticipated? Or can they be reduced? Can you pull back a bit? Compare your expenses versus your profits. Were there any impacts? Were there any environmental impacts? Did you notice impacts on pollinators or other beneficial insects? Was the climate different? Did that have an effect on controls? Has something that you used historically seemed to not be working? Did you calibrate your sprayer properly? Is potentially pesticide resistance developing? And do you need to change your plan? And as we mentioned earlier, IPM plans change often in response to new diseases and pests. Changing climate can influence pest distribution and abundance as well. So we're going to now move on to exploring the world of pollinators and their significance. Pollinators are really critical to food production and biodiversity, providing pollination services, ecosystem services, contributing to plant diversity, and ultimately having a significant economic impact by increasing crop yields and crop quality and contribute so much financially and in economic value throughout the world. So we really want to minimize harm to pollinators and support pollinator health. We'll talk a little bit about risks of some pest management practices and integrated pest management and pollinator protection. So with our introduction to pollinators, I'm going to talk a little bit about the diversity and importance of pollinators, what pollinators contribute to agriculture and the environment is, and challenges faced by pollinators, and then ultimately some conservation efforts and best practices that can be implemented. So we often think of the honeybee when we think of pollinators, but there are several other types of bees. Birds are pollinators, as are bats, moths, flies, and butterflies. They all help to transfer pollen from the male parts of plants to the female parts of plants, facilitating fertilization and ultimately the production of seeds and fruits, and thereby contributing to ecosystem and agricultural productivity and sustainability. So this is by no means a detailed breakdown of all the different types of bees out there, but I'm going to talk a little bit about honeybees, bumblebees, and and solitary bees. So an example are mason bees, which many people are familiar with. So they all have slightly different or some similar adaptations and some different adaptations. Honeybees tend to live in large colonies, bumblebees in smaller colonies, and our mason bees are mostly solitary, and each female constructing her own nest. Honeybees collect pollen in baskets on their hind legs. Bumblebees and solitary bees have hairy bodies that collect pollen. Honeybees tend to visit a wide range of flowers, as do bumblebees. Many solitary bees are highly specialized, have some very species specific and are often specialists on particular plants. Honeybees, their pollination efficiency is due to frequent flower visits and communication with fellow hive members. Bumblebees have a very robust hairy body, which collects a lot of pollen, and their buzz pollination, what considered buzz pollination, and where pollen is distributed via vibrations onto the flowers that they're visiting. And solitary bees, often mason bees, have hairy bodies as well, which collect the pollen and deposit which is transferred during flower visits as well. So honeybees are typically active during warm months and during daylight hours. Bumblebees are also active during the day, but sometimes I know they can be active a little bit at slightly cooler temperatures and under lower light conditions. So they might be out there a bit earlier in the season. Solitary bees typically more active during warmer months and during daylight hours. Moths and butterflies, they're also wonderful pollinators. I've just used some examples of some of my favorites. The western swallowtail, Taylor's checker spot, Cecropia moth, tiger moth. Some of these may be present in your area as well. Moths tend to be more active moths are active majority in the evening and nighttime. Butterflies active during the day. Moths are adapted to more low light conditions and are sensitive to UV light. Butterflies have good color vision, are able to perceive bright colors. Moths often enjoy tubular fragrant flowers that are open at night or at dusk. Butterflies tend to visit brightly colored flowers that are open during the day. And both have a long proboscis, which is a flexible tube used for feeding. Flies are one of my favorite groups of pollinators. And I've got pictures here, the top left and the bottom right, that's a bee fly. And then on the bottom left and the top right, that's a hoverfly. The hoverfly is the adult form of the syrphid fly that I was talking about earlier. That larva of the syrphid fly, hoverfly, these are the ones that are really active aphid predators. Many species of hoverflies and bee flies. Some of these guys are more generalists, while others are more specialized in their flower preferences. They have evolved to resemble bees or wasps, which helps to deter some predators. They feed on nectar for energy, collecting pollen and transferring it in between their flower visits. Yeah, they're really great and quite cute. So bats and birds, in BC where I am, none of the bats are feeding on nectar. They're important in the tropics. They have these long snouts and tongues that reach for nectar, and their pollen will collect on their fur, and they'll transfer it to other flowers when they visit. They are critical to the reproduction of some nocturnal plants in the tropics. Pollinator birds include hummingbirds, sunbirds, and honey eaters. We've got 4 species of hummingbirds in my neck of the woods. They'll hover over flowers and access nectar with their long beaks, carrying pollen on their heads and necks. They tend to like bright tubular flowers. And yes, they are critical to the reproduction of many flowering plants worldwide. So, pollinators and food production. Pollinators have a significant impact and an invaluable impact on food production globally. They contribute to it by facilitating fertilization of flowers. They contribute to seed and fruit production, better seed and fruit production, which translates to a more abundant harvest and greater revenue to a farmer. Pollination also, well-pollinated pollination is also critical in production of the high quality fruits and seeds. Well-pollinated plants do tend to produce larger, more uniform fruits and seeds. A larger seed is more viable as there are more resources in that seed for that young plant to draw resources from. Pollination, we consider future breeding potential. Pollinators provide plant breeders with a wide range of genetic material within a particular variety, which helps them able to develop new improved varieties via cross-pollination and with potentially improved traits such as, more resilience to climate stress, potentially disease-resistant varieties. And pollinators really can maintain the viability of specific crops and varieties that may be highly specialized or require specific pollinator attributes for pollination due to their flower shape. So, the example of cocoa and chocolate production is one here. And then this is just an example of different insect pollinated of different crops in North America that rely on insect pollination or to which insect pollination is important. It's also want to note that even with some wind pollinated plants, it's been shown that the presence of insect pollinators can really help improve crop quality. And yeah, so that sort of leads to pollinators and economics. Really, they're invaluable, but estimates for value for global food production has ranged between $235 to $577 billion annually. This may, in fact, be higher. They contribute to about 30% of global food production by volume. So really, they are critical to both global and local food security. And indirectly, pollinators provide employment to many, many people. by virtue of all the different services that they provide. Pollinators really promote biodiversity. You know, diverse ecosystems can more easily recover from disruptive events such as natural disasters, diseases, or human activities. The more diverse the system, the more opportunity there is for different uh, plants, for example, to recolonize an area after a disastrous event. Biodiversity also is important because it provides opportunities for learning and scientific discoveries, beneficial scientific discoveries. When we think about many of our medicines and many of our, even our, some of our sprays, these have been derived from plants as well. Pollinators really ensure genetic diversity within a population. So, they often visit multiple flowers during their foraging activity. And then this cross-pollination really contributes to the genetic diversity among plants within a population, which can increase on a species level or a community level, the plant community's resilience to diseases, pests, and, things like climate change. Pollinators also support food chains, and not just our food chains, those for the other animals that we share the planet with. So the fruits and seeds that are produced via pollination are really important food sources for various animals, including birds, mammals, and insects. And as these animals um, consume the fruits and seeds of the insect pollinated plants, they may deposit them in and thus facilitate their dispersal in an environment, which ultimately can contribute to plant diversity in an area, which contributes ultimately to ecosystem health. And pollinators have been significant in art and culture throughout the millennia. I'm Ukrainian, and historically or going back, bees were considered to be good fortune, to bring good fortune and prosperity. Honey was considered a symbol of wealth. Beeswax is used to make these wonderful eggs. Bees also inspired literature and folklore and folk tales. Aesop's fable about the bees, the wasps, and the hornets is an example of this, as a lesson about the importance of discernment and acknowledging the contributions of others. Within art, artists throughout history have been inspired by pollinators, and there's examples of this that range from ancient cave art through to street art. So to summarize that, pollinators do play a critical role in agriculture by facilitating plant reproduction, which promotes genetic diversity and really generally supports ecosystem health. And many crops rely on pollinators for successful production, and this directly impacts food security and human well-being. Pollinators also contribute to the health of ecosystems by providing habitat and food resources to other animals, and which help maintain ecosystem function. These animals help to maintain ecosystem function, as do the plants. So we must and we can help pollinators via many different practices. These can include habitat restoration, promoting pollinator-friendly plants, and reducing pesticide use. So this brings us to a discussion on different strategies that can be used to protect pollinators and how to balance pest management and pollinator protection. So some major threats to pollinators include habitat loss, urbanization, deforestation, and agriculture have reduced some habitat by limiting food sources and nesting sites. Pesticide exposure has really harmed some pollinators, and the exposure, particularly to certain pesticides, can obviously kill pollinators, disrupt foraging, disrupt navigation and reproduction via how they impact the pollinators, for example, nervous system, etc. Diseases and parasites are also a threat. Most of you have probably heard of colony collapse disorder. Uh, this is a combination of different issues, which can include things like mite, pests on bees. You can see in the photo of the wing there, underneath the wing, there's a mite on a honeybee. Fungal and bacterial diseases can also really impact pollinator populations. Variable changing climate can alter pollinator habitat, making habitats unsuitable for certain species. This can also disrupt well-established plant and pollinator relationships. So changes in temperature, precipitation, root or relative humidity can disrupt the synchrony between certain flowering plants and the life cycle of pollinators. So this can impact food availability for those pollinators at a key time, and then also as well, the pollination success of those plants. And then, changing environmental conditions can potentially lead to the increased prevalence and distribution of the pests and diseases of pollinators, posing additional threats to their health. So, strategies to protect pollinators that I'm going to talk about here include the use of selective pesticides, providing food sources, creating habitats, and conserving natural enemies. So the use of selective pesticides really can be beneficial if you are able to choose a more narrow spectrum pesticide for your issues that minimize harm to non-target organisms. And you can really take a look at this by, reading the labels, looking at different lists of harmful or lists of pesticides, talk to your perhaps extension person or your where you're buying your inputs to help get them to help you review what you might use. Minimizing exposure, so minimizing pollinator exposure to pesticides is another strategy. This can involve timing your applications to avoid periods where pollinators are most active, for example, in the evening. Also using methods that can reduce drift or runoff. So, for using low drift nozzles, the use of adjuvants, really watching the weather, making sure you're not spraying when it's very, very windy. Just below, here are just examples of, an organic system and conventional system. I'm not going to get into detail here, but too much. But, for example, if you're in an organic system, using a spinosad-based product to manage leaf roller before bloom, and then moving to a Bacillus thuringiensis product after bloom. You can recall the Bacillus thuringiensis product is specific to moth and butterfly larvae, whereas spinosad is a more broad spectrum pesticide and can cause some issues with pollinators if you're not cautious with it. Replacing agrimec with some sulfur or oils or biological when possible. Yes, so again, these are things that you can talk to your supplier or your extension services about. Creating habitats, providing resources for pollinators. This can include preserving wild areas. These help to support biodiversity. And these wild areas, if you're preserving them, can provide some nesting and overwintering sites and refuge from pesticides with, the idea that larger, more interconnected habitats can support larger and more diverse populations. Cover crops, the use of cover cropping as your cover crop can include some flowering plants as well, that like mustards or sweet alyssum or buckwheat. These attract pollinators. Having a pollinator or beneficial insect plantings within a field, edge plantings can provide some habitat as well. Hedgerows, with installing hedgerows and having hedgerows in as much as well as preserving habitat, you may help to limit some soil erosion too, depending on the density and the structure of your hedgerow. Reducing tillage if possible. This helps to preserve ground nesting species, conservation till, strip till, no-till operations, being really mindful if you are implementing some of these practices that you really want to have a robust crop rotation schedule. Bee hotels, these can be provided for, some solitary bees, the mason bees, but I just wanted to really note that if they're not maintained properly, they can facilitate the spread of diseases and parasites. You want to really place these where the southeast morning sun hits. This can limit their use by wasps. Just ensure that nesting tubes and the structures are clean and that they are cleaned if possible, and then you get rid of them if it's not possible to clean them, so that you don't really cause any issues. And asking the supplier of them information on how to properly care for them, if they're appropriate for certain species. These are things to consider if using bee hotels. Providing food sources, we talked a little bit about providing earlier. So really ensuring plant diversity if you're going to install a beneficial insect garden or create some habitat, including a wide variety of plants which can ensure a food supply throughout the season. So there are always blooms or nectar supply for pollinators. Sourcing native plants where possible, that's also helpful. Considering the flower traits in your plantings and what various beneficial insects are attracted to. So, color is a consideration. Bees enjoying blue, yellow, violet, purple in particular. Butterflies being attracted to orange, red, yellow, pink, or purple blooms. And variety of bloom shapes can attract different pollinators. A variety of scents, thinking about bloom time. Water is also another consideration if you are wanting to help preserve pollinators. Bees use water for drinking, for cooling their nests, for digestion, dilute honey for their larval food. Some pollinators will collect water to bring back. Some pollinators will collect water to bring back to their hives, to their colonies. Ponds, streams, dew-covered plants, bird baths, dripping faucets, dripping irrigation lines. These are all things that pollinators use as water sources. Many pollinators are small and they drown easily. I'm sure you've seen this if you have a pool or what have you. Artificial water sources should be shallow if possible. And if you have artificial water sources, making sure that there's something in there for the bees to land on. For example, stones, floating cork, pieces of, floating cork pieces so that pollinators can land. Conserving natural enemies helps to protect pollinators because with an abundant natural enemy populations or use of populations, this limits and lowers the need for pesticides. So ways that you can conserve, potentially reduce the need for pesticides if you've got healthy, robust biological controls. So habitat conservation and modification, what we were talking about earlier with beneficial plantings for pollinators, these can also be a resource for natural enemies as well. Cover crops, sweet alyssum in particular for syrphid flies, which you may be able to tell right now is one of my favorite predators. Reducing pesticide use and using as narrow of spectrum pesticides as possible. These preserve both beneficial or predator parasitoid insects as well as your pollinators. Use of some biological pesticides that are narrow spectrum and have low toxicity are beneficial both to pollinators as well as natural enemies. And then the release of commercially produced biological controls can reduce the need for the use of pesticides. Crop rotation, again, this can disrupt pest life cycles, making it easier for natural enemies to do their job, reducing the need for pesticides. So these are things to just really consider on your farm. So really, the use of IPM practices and working on preserving pollinators on farm, really overall, it's really super beneficial, not just because it's the right thing to do, but it makes sense. Can help to increase your crop yields, help with improving ecosystem services. We protect by protecting pollinators, we're indirectly enhancing other ecosystem services, and enhanced biodiversity. And a diverse pollinator population really contributes to a more robust, richer, and diverse ecosystem. Some challenges that you may face when trying to implement these practices on your farms, obviously economics. So the initial cost of implementing some of these practices can be high. However, I know in British Columbia, for example, we have certain grants or subsidies through our environmental farm plan that can help offset some of the costs. Sometimes some conservation groups may help you implement beneficial plantings. Look at your extension services and to your, some of your university agricultural programs, and you may find grants or subsidies to help with the implementation of some of these things on your farm. Lack of knowledge, it's hard to find good sources of information. Again, you probably in your community, within your, local agricultural groups, there are probably some training and outreach programs and experts that can help you with finding good solutions and good information. And then possibly some trade-offs. Balancing pest control with pollinator protection can sometimes be challenging, and this requires really careful selection and timing, and of your pesticide applications in particular. And really adopting an integrated pest management and pollinator management plan, really, ultimately you will benefit from this, and really plan carefully, look for online resources. Again, there are many available, and this is all possible. And in the US, you have really great extension services. In Canada, we have the Environmental Farm Plan. And in other countries, there are all sorts of other organizations that can help you with developing these plans. So thank you for joining me here today. And I really wish you all the best of luck developing an IPM plan for your farm and your operation. And here's to a good season.